Mom belly keeps growing. Doctor sees scan and calls cops. Katie Smith was just a normal mid-20-year-old young lady. Well, that is if you think the situation is normal. Miss Smith was a mere 24 years old when something unexpected began growing in her stomach. Doctors were baffled and just couldn't figure out what it was. Katie's stomach started to grow and blew up so quickly it looked as if she was pregnant. Strange thing was she wasn't pregnant at all. She took pregnancy test after pregnancy test and they were all negative, but doctors simply dismissed her. Smith is from Swansea in Wales and started noticing some strange weight gain. In a few years, she'd gone from normal to someone that looked as if they were pregnant at full term. Smith told BBC that she was never a very thin girl, but she slowly developed this huge belly. Katie was following a healthy lifestyle and was conscious of her figure as most young ladies that age are. She was an avid gymmer and embraced her curvy figure, and this is the reason the weight gain wasn't frustrating but confusing. The unsolved mystery continued. Katie felt uncomfortable and insecure. She didn't even want to work at a Christmas party because her figure was so misleading. Katie felt she was fat and that her outfit was unflattering, and any woman would feel uncomfortable in her situation. Katie had done everything, but her belly wouldn't stop growing. She said, "I was exercising and eating healthily, but I was slowly getting bigger." There's nothing more frustrating than following a healthy way of living and still packing on weight, and rapidly too. "It crept up so slowly that I didn't know anything was wrong. I thought I was putting on timber," Katie continued. Katie was putting on mass amounts of weight and she still had no clue why. The time had come where Katie could no longer ignore the excessive weight gain. It was becoming clear that all the weight she was putting on was transferring directly to her belly region. The weight felt strange. How would she move forward? Katie's stomach felt hard and was irritated to the touch. Nonetheless, she was content and adamant the situation would progress and hopefully end with time. But the situation wasn't going to work out how she hoped. She'd gone up multiple sizes in dresses and now reached size 8. She felt so afraid and didn't want to seek medical attention. Her father was a doctor and this made her apprehensive about the whole situation. Katie never knew that far more concerning things lay ahead. She had come only to one conclusion, which was not what she wanted nor wanted to accept, but this was potentially what her situation had come to. What could be the one thing that was doing this to her? She assessed her symptoms and all the features that accompanied what her body was going through, and there was one explanation: pregnancy. Her stomach area was expanding, she was constantly tired, and in a serious relationship. As she analyzed all the components over and over again, she was certain it meant she had a bun in the oven. Both Katie and her boyfriend were rather nervous. If she was actually pregnant, it was certainly unplanned and hadn't been on her agenda. Jamie Gibson was Katie's boyfriend of 10 years, and the pair had considered there was a chance she had a little human inside her. They were certainly not prepared, but it was evident they needed to at least get it checked out. After taking a pregnancy test, the couple was a bit taken aback that it came back with a negative. The two simply thought the test was incorrect and instantly went for round 2. The same result, negative. The pair decided the time had come to pay a visit to a healthcare professional. What could possibly be going on here? Could Katie be sick? Did she miscarry? Their minds were racing and they were just scared. She'd run out of options, quite frankly. She had to see a doctor. Sadly, Katie wasn't given the news she wanted. The doctor explained that she was merely fat. Katie's spirits were down and she saw no escape at the rate things were happening. The doctor had blatantly dismissed her fears and concerns, but Katie knew something wasn't right. She ignored it since she'd seen a doctor and her daily routine was unaffected. Katie thought about it so much she didn't understand how she wasn't pregnant. It really looked and felt as if she was. What was up? She didn't trust the doctor and his conclusion, but they were professionals, so she had no other choice really, right? If Katie was indeed pregnant, the issue would disappear when the baby was born. However, her belly continued growing for 2 whole years. Each and every month it got larger and larger until one day at work something horrible happened. It was an average day for Katie at work until she started feeling lightheaded, nauseous, and spacey, and she collapsed. When she regained consciousness, Katie was informed by her coworkers that she'd fainted. Katie knew immediately she had to go see a doctor. She said, "It was a tough period in work, and when I passed out, my GP put it down to stress." There was another explanation, and she had to continue on just as she was living prior to the ordeal. Is it normal or even possible to faint from stress? Katie didn't believe this was the reasoning. Her doctor reassured her nothing major was happening and she certainly wasn't pregnant. Katie was being asked about her pregnancy everywhere now. People noticed her expanding stomach and she couldn't even hide it. She explained the situation over and over. The doctors say I'm just overweight, Katie continued telling all those that asked each and every day. She was frustrated with the situation and saw no solution and resolution ahead. Katie said she was constantly being stopped and questioned about when the baby was coming. She started giving in to spare them and herself the embarrassment. She stopped telling them she's overweight, but that's what she started to believe. Katie was walking around town with a huge belly and had started to feel both embarrassed and insecure. She began shopping in the maternity section of shops, Nothing fit her and her fake baby bump was still growing. I remember trying to shop for clothes in December 2016 and nothing would fit. I was skin and bone on top, then this massive lump and normal legs. The only thing that was going to fit was maternity wear. Katie had become stubborn about seeing the doctor. It was after fainting a few times again, breathing difficulties and major weight gain had truly halted her quality of living, and she needed assistance more than ever. She still would never have actually gone unless her coworkers had insisted. People were wondering how Katie let herself go and why she wasn't caring for herself. Something was for sure not right. I can't believe she waited this long. She continued on avoiding it as much as she possibly could, but it got to the point where it was simply too much. She'd fainted for the 4th time. This time around, the doctor said it was her acne medication. Katie wouldn't take this reasoning. She knew he was wrong. It was as if the doctors weren't taking her case seriously or her symptoms. As time went on, they carried on blaming anything and everything they could in her life. Katie decided enough was enough. She wanted answers, real ones. Katie had stopped taking her acne medication months before, and she was not settling for this diagnosis. She went for a second opinion, and the doctor said she must be pregnant. He did blood test after blood test, and no results were conclusive. Katie's general practitioner even said she must be pregnant, regardless of blood test results. Another ultrasound was ordered. It reached the point in which even walking had become hard for Katie. Let's not forget breathing, too. As per the others, the next doctor requested a pregnancy test. Was she finally going to get a proper diagnosis? Hopefully soon enough, but in the meantime, a door was flung wide open, revealing a whole new aspect to Katie's case. Katie carefully watched the doctor as she did the ultrasound. When she saw her expression, it became evident something wasn't right at all. The doctor's eyes grew and her facial expression dimmed. The doctor looked as if he was even petrified. The doctor asked for a consultant and Katie was ridden with fear. Jamie, her boyfriend, tried to calm her down and ease her fear, but panic had set in and she was shaken up. What was in her belly? What was growing? The ultrasound screen was completely blank. Katie wasn't pregnant, this was confirmed, but something was wrong. They didn't know what, but they knew it was life-threatening. There were endless possibilities and they requested a CT urgently to get to the bottom of it. Katie was terrified, worried, anxious, and had no clue what was going to follow. Her mind was racing as she waited to find out what was wrong. The CT that had been requested since the ultrasound was completely blank, depicted something absolutely crazy. Doctors tried to calm Katie down and prepare her for what they were going to reveal and explain. Both she and her boyfriend waited in suspense. Katie wasn't pregnant, that was certain. Her enlarged stomach was due to the development of a massive ovarian mass. Katie's world came to a complete halt. The doctor didn't know what he was dealing with or the extent of the mass. This wasn't your average cyst and measured at 24 centimeters thick. It was attached to her stomach too. This explained the weight gain finally, but her life was at risk and the mass needed to be removed as quickly as possible. A cyst is a fluid-filled sac that can grow in a woman's ovary. They're an uncommon occurrence and don't cause any further issues or harm. They usually dissolve on their own. For Katie, this wasn't the case. Cysts interfere with individuals' lives when they rupture, as they can block the blood supply to the ovaries or grow to an abnormal size just as this one did. Katie's had honestly grown to another level. It was absolutely massive. A month passed and Katie was discussing her options with a specialist in order to move forward. She says she can still visualize the look on the consultant's face when she saw her belly. He was shocked, absolutely. He had nicely and very gently explained to her about the ovarian mass, but his face said it all. He was in utter awe. No one expected it to be so large. Even the specialist couldn't believe just how big the cyst was. Another possibility was that there were multiple cysts and that they may be attached to other organs within her abdomen. Katie was petrified and she knew there was no other choice but to undergo surgery. They crossed off any additional explanations and were unclear of the effect the cyst had been having on Katie's body. She was most definitely experiencing side effects, ones that had no relation to being pregnant. The doctor was uncertain of the details about the cyst but decided something needed to be done. He was also shocked that the other doctors had not only turned her away but told her she was fine without further assessment. The doctor was certain of one thing, and that was that Katie would lose an ovary. Furthermore, she was told that her hospital stay might have to be longer than expected. It depended on exactly where the cyst was. She felt as though she was giving her life away. Katie's mom was currently in Australia and she lived there. She decided not to tell her as she really didn't want her mom to worry. On the other hand, she'd been through a terribly rough time and she knew the time was nearing to tell them. Thankfully, they'd now narrowed it down and she could tell them without the uncertainty that loomed over her. She'd gone through this without her mom by her side. It had reached the point where she could no longer do this by herself and she longed for familial support. She decided to contact her dear mother and the other people closest to her sister. Katie had struggled through this medical issue all on her own. Enough was enough. She had been strong, but she needed the love and support from those close to her throughout this trauma. Within just a couple of days, her mom had landed. She took the earliest available flight when she heard the news. Sadly, her dad remained in their hometown, but this made it very clear he was just a call away. As soon as she told him her support system had come together for her, they wished they'd known sooner and could have been through it all. She was equipped for the scary day ahead finally. Katie was told by her doctor the surgery would be in 4 weeks' time, and it came quicker than she expected, almost in a flash. Between the time that Katie had visited the doctor and her surgery, her stomach evolved even more. It was measuring an additional 5 inches, a drastic development. Given the severity of Katie's case, a high-risk obstetrics specialist was referred and would be one of the individuals operating. As they explained the procedure, they discussed how an incision would be made from Katie's chest bone all the way to her pelvic bone. This was the incision that used to be performed in previous day C-sections. The day arrived sooner than she thought. Katie checked into the hospital and putting on her surgery gown as well as some socks. As she dressed, the nurse led her along a corridor. Katie was shaking with fear. She was so nervous and terribly afraid of needles. Being put under is a worry for many individuals. She started to panic, and 2 nurses had to be called in to help hold her down and prevent her from flinching when they inserted the needle, as moving was dangerous. Katie recalls feeling as if she was dying. She was so overcome with fear and couldn't stop thinking the worst. The doctors had planned for the operation to go on for approximately an hour. Things took an unexpected turn, and she ended up being in surgery for 5 hours. This stressed out her family, of course, as they sat in the waiting room nervously waiting and praying for their beloved Katie. The doctors were doing their best, but what was the outcome? Her cyst was gigantic, but the aspect that truly took everyone by surprise was how heavy it was. It was about time this huge mass was removed from poor Katie's abdomen, and Katie was ecstatic. She'd soon be back to her normal life, and this entire experience would be behind her. It needed to be. This was an incredibly scary time for everyone, but there was no other way for Katie to return to her normal everyday life. A 90-minute surgery had turned to an all-day surgery, leaving everyone on edge, but she pulled through, and now it was time to recover. The cyst inside Katie's belly weighed in at a whopping 60 pounds. She weighed 60 pounds more because of it. If you're unsure about how much that is, think about how heavy 7 babies would be. She was carrying around the weight of 7 babies in her stomach. She was woken up by nurses describing and showing her images of just how big it was. As Katie awoke from surgery, she was totally out of it, dazed and overwhelmed. Katie explained, "I remember still being groggy from the anesthetic as they wheeled me back to the ward, and excited hospital staff was showing photos in front of me. The staff were just as shook as she was. The huge cyst had been accounted for 1/3 of Katie's current body weight, and Katie understood the impact it had on her everyday life. Things that were normal for Katie had become a struggle and difficulty. This cyst had truly altered her life at the time. Now the major burden was finally gone. It was only until this growth had been removed that Katie realized how terribly it had actually affected her. Driving a car, walking upstairs, and small things had changed. She was more appreciative of the intricate details of her everyday life. She was grateful. This surgery had sprung her back to her life for good. Katie couldn't come to terms with how much weight she'd been lagging around. She was in total shock, to say the least. Once she'd fully regained her consciousness and was able to properly analyze the images, she said, "It looked like a massive pile of ice cream, so I called it Mr. Whippy." She definitely must have had some remnants of the anesthesia. The doctors were completely taken aback by the size of her cyst. They declared it some kind of medical phenomenon. The cyst had become the talk of the hospital, staff, Katie, and everyone in reach was in disbelief and couldn't get over how big it was. A mere 4 days passed and Katie was discharged. Her mom and her boyfriend had been right by her side through it all, and Katie had been so terribly scared, but she'd overcome it, and it was definitely worth the struggle. Katie says she doesn't remember what it was like with that additional 60 pounds slowing her down, but the surgery had a small complication. Katie had been left with a large scar the size of a ruler from the top of her chest all the way down to her pelvis, something she'll have forever. Katie made a rather quick recovery. She was up and walking quite soon after the operation. She was eager, excited, and simply wanted to get going with her new beginning. There was one downside of the surgery, unfortunately. Katie lost her right ovary. Thankfully, she still had her left one and would still very much be able to have and carry children. As long as this was the outcome, it wasn't that bad. Katie's abdominal area is plastered in stretch marks, which will never let her live down this whole ordeal, and she will always be reminded of her cyst. The rest of Katie's loved ones came to visit after her surgery, and they were taken aback by what she looked like. Katie looked like an entirely new person, half her size. She was super thin, her actual body was showing, and her stunning figure went back to normal. She was super happy. As Katie reflects on her recovery, she explains how it had been incredibly easy and her life has changed forever. Katie explains how her health is completely different and way better than the years before, both physically and mentally. It's crazy how one surgery changed her entire life. Katie's addressed her friends, family, and fellow workers to give thanks to them for their support and assistance through such a difficult time. Katie's well aware she wouldn't have been able to get through such a difficult time in her life without them. She's blessed and counts her lucky stars daily. Katie would have never had the confidence to share her story a year ago. She has the ability to develop and love her body and is now comfortable in her own skin. Katie's now publicly telling her story. She's an inspiration to all and hoping to inspire more. Regardless of such a tough experience and the constant reminder which she sees in her scars and stretch marks, she snapped back and is living a normal life. The greatest of all is that she'll be able to have children with just one ovary, thankfully. Katie is appreciative of her surgeon.